Hello, this is Gabrielle Moore coming with the application activity for Module 3. And we're talking about our starting points and how that's represented in a cultural flower. So my starting points would include individualism, both synchronous and sequential, universalism, diffuseness, low power distance, and high context. So for individualism, as a child of a single parent, this is one of the characteristics, the cultural starting points that I found most easy to identify. Um, I I was a child of a single parent. I was an only child. Um, we were not part of a larger community, really. We didn't see extended family often or identify with them culturally. We didn't identify or attend a church family or a cultural, religious element. So we were pretty much just the two of us against the world. And as, of course, as an only child, I saw myself as the center of the universe. So it was very much individualistic. Um, my mother, in her uneducated career path, um, had to put up with a lot of misogyny. So I early on became very aware of unfairness and the power that an individual has versus when you don't have any representation, when you don't have anybody in your corner. We were sort of in a perpetual state of struggle. So, with regards to time and my cultural flower representation, I feel like I have a foot in both sequential and synchronous. So, I started out my life in a very sequential manner. I would say that I was very engaged in counting to a time when X would happen, and then, of course, everything would come together and I would have arrived. I thought that was like graduation from high school, counting down the days until I graduated. And at that point, things would be so much better. Of course, they weren't. Then, I became engaged at a very young age. So I was counting down the days until I got married. And my husband was in the Navy. So there were always deployments that we were counting. And then I was sort of miserable in California where we lived when we were in the military. And so I was counting down the days till I came home. That sort of changed and I transitioned. Now my starting point, once I had a family, is I started understanding the cyclical nature of things, of seasons, of child rearing, of living, and I definitely feel that's more where I'm at now. So I also would a whole claim to universalist um, cultural starting point. In my early adolescence, my mother's misogynistic workplace became, like a known piece of my life. Um, and I was became very aware of inequality because she was constantly telling stories of being treated poorly because of her status, because of the fact she was married and we weren't part of a particular religious affiliation. So even in elementary school, I became very aware of inequalities of, although I felt like all the rules should apply equally, I realized they didn't. And like in the fifth grade, I had this teacher who he was new, he was young, and he had very obvious favorites in my class. And I became frustrated, um, increasingly frustrated with how the favorite girls got to have two pillows at reading time, but I only got one. So I took two pillows one day because the rules should apply to everybody equally. And he made me give back my pillow. And so I threw a big tantrum and threw my chair and my desk down, which was really unusual for me. I was a very timid child. And anyway, that sort of was a turning point in my youth. Um, anyway, yeah, it was a very time where you realize that no, the rules don't all apply to everybody equally, and there is a lot of favoritism that goes on in the world. So I would say that as an empath, I I'm definitely have a more diffuse look at life, a starting point of diffuseness. I've always had a difficult time understanding big picture stories and big picture ideas and theories and historical um, stories without understanding the. I had a hard time with the details of those until I understood the big picture of it all. So I definitely understand that being an empath has affected that because um, I'm drawn to stories. I'm drawn to people and relationships way before analytics. And I'm also like a big picture thinker. Um, at my last job, when I worked at the hospital, we had a new president come in. The old president had been there for many years and it had definitely developed a particular culture around compassion and empathy. And we had this new president come in from a for profit hospital, and he was all about metrics and measurables. And there was a really hard time when we had to switch from thinking metrics and measurables with regards to patient experience, patient outcomes, patient satisfaction, because you can't, in particularly in my role, there was a huge amount of value that I place as a leader on people, on relationships, on safety, on the feelings that came when a patient was with us, and it wasn't measurable, and there was no metric to it. So that was really hard for me. I definitely believe that I'm in more in the low power distance, with a starting point. This was I was born in the 70s, so just coming out of that very Mad Men-ish times in the industry that my mother worked in, which was insurance. There was a lot of, supposedly this third wave of feminism. My mom didn't get any of that, but it was all about hard work and achievement. If you work hard, you worked hard, you went to school, you graduated, or you went to college, then you got a job at a good company, you worked really hard for them, for 20, 30, 40 years, and then you retired with your gold watch. Um, but you worked your way up the ladder by hard work and diligence. And I was very aware of those around me who had more power than me, um, and my mother. And as far as context, I definitely come from um, a high context environment. Uh, my mother and her mother before her were uh, were raised in homes that had very poor communication skills taught. It was a children are seen and not heard environment, very toxic, and therefore that's how I was raised. I wasn't raised in a toxic environment necessarily, but definitely poor or non-communicative skills. Everything was implied. You knew what you knew because you had observed it. You didn't need to be specifically told or taught. And when I had family, it was, or when I started my family, we were pretty tight. So there's just a lot that goes unsaid. There's a lot of nonverbal communication, and I am very demonstrative in um, my hand gestures and my face gestures, just humor and so forth. So I find that nonverbal communication has become kind of part of my family's culture. That is all for my presentation. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.